you. Let's talk to Jonathan Davis, the economist and wealth manager. Hi, Jonathan. Morning.
Good morning, Vanessa.
So this piece says that most people will move social class during their lifetime. Is the legacy of the last recession, which we're supposed to be out of now, I believe, I don't know whether you would agree with that, but anyway, is the legacy of that lots of us are moving downwards? We're downwardly mobile, not upwardly.
First of all, you're saying that they're saying that most people will move up the classes. Of course, it's historical, the data that they've looked at. That's an important point. So it's not the present tense, it's the past tense.
Right.
It happened in the past. Now, to answer your question, it's not inevitable as a result of the crash. It's inevitable, as far as I'm concerned, as a result of the debt explosion in the 80s, the 90s and the 2000s.
Yeah.
And now we're experiencing the fallout from the debt explosion. So in respect of social mobility, clearly, in the 80s, you had the right to buy policy where people could buy their council houses, and that got them on the so-called ladder and so on, and that helped with social mobility. Also, markets were freeing up, so people could move into jobs and careers that previously they perhaps couldn't do so. But now the economic situation is that, first of all, you have to take out massive debt to go on to tertiary education, to go on to college or university. So when you leave, you've got massive debt, which is obviously not brilliant for your prospects to have that weighing on your shoulders. And then secondly, because the economy is not nearly as vibrant as it was when debt was exploding, irrespective of the fact there is some economic growth in the UK, believe me, it is not widespread and it is not vibrant. So, of course, the opportunities are such that so many folk are going for the same jobs. Therefore, the top employers or in the employment sectors that people want to get into, they can pick and choose and decide whether or not they even want to pay the people. So, of course, if you can afford to work for nothing, then you're going to put yourself forward for those jobs. This is not helping social mobility. This is the opposite of, this is making people more immobile than mobile.
Has it been a past kind of norm that we expect to do better than our parents?
Well, the answer to that is effectively yes, since about 3 generations ago.
Yes.
Because following the Second World War, there was enormous regeneration that had to happen particularly in England. So, of course, that got people into work. You know the old story. You'd leave school on Friday, you'd start work on a Monday. Well, that hasn't been around for donkeys. And it is the case that since the war, each generation was more successful than the prior one. However, the current younger generation,
yes,
say even up to the age of 35, is massively waylaid by problems, economic problems, debts, even mortgage debts. You and I have talked about this 100 times.
Yes.
When you look at one particular aspect of this the Sutton Trust report about the rise of no pay for internships, my goodness, you know, we're talking about history. It's going back to the early 19th century, where you could only become an articled clerk in the law or accountancy if you got paid nothing or practically nothing. Prior to that, to get in a commission in the Royal Navy, you weren't paid a salary. You even had to buy in to a commission, an officership in the Royal Navy. And that is where we are now. And, you know, we've talked about this many, many times. I can see that sometimes I've spoken to you, you've used the word doomsaying when I've talked about it. Yes. Well, you know, Vanessa, the chickens are finally coming home to roost. This is a practical example of how the debt explosion up until the late 2000s has created a Western economy where everyone's up to here with debt, and the opportunities for advancement are reducing. This does not bode well for the future.
What about those people who managed somehow or other in the 70s or the 60s or even the 80s and 90s to scrape together the money for a mortgage on a property, and simply by virtue of the fact that it's in London, they are now sitting in or on something worth quite a lot of money. Some, concrete capital has accrued, and were they to sell it today and move to somewhere smaller or move out of London, they would actually have, a chunk of cash, possibly beyond their wildest dreams. What about all those people? They're not in debt, are they? Or are they?
Yes. Well, of course, largely they're not, because you're talking retirees. Mm-hmm. Retirees largely are not in debt. But if I may say, this is about social mobility.
Yes.
Retirees are at the end of their careers. They've ended their careers. Uh-huh. We're talking about the not even the next generation in their 40s and 50s, but the next generation, younger than you and me, in their 20s and 30s, who are trying to get moving, who are trying to have the same opportunities that those millionaire retirees you've just been talking about, millionaires, by the way, by virtue of the phenomenal rise in house prices, but not actually because of anything to do in the general economy. Uh-huh. So the young folk, either, as I said, they've got this significant debt on them because they had to borrow to go to university. You and I didn't have to borrow to go to university. The next generation did. They've got 30 or 40,000 pounds of debt, and then they come out and they find that a third of graduate jobs are in call centres, earning not much more than the minimum wage. And then you look at some professions in law, accountancy, fashion, music, politics. You have to work for nothing for several months or maybe a year in order to get your career going. Well, clearly this is not what the 20-somethings experienced 25 years ago. Now, having said that, of course, the generation before that, even in the 50s, they didn't have big opportunities. There wasn't much more social mobility. There was much more social mobilities in the 80s and 90s, but it's reversed, and it's reversing big time. The opportunities for the 20s and 30s is diabolical, and it can only get worse until there is, as I've said before, previously to you, a radical change in government and Bank of England policies.
Jonathan, thank you very much indeed. Jonathan Davis there, economist, wealth manager. I'm not going to say doomsayer, because I think I always say that when